James Morrow, on this issue of Hong Kong, you've written about it, and others now are bravely making quite a significant point that this will be an enormous issue of at least this year, but possibly beyond, in relation to where Hong Kong goes from here, how its relationship with basically its parent entity, China, is in this transition period. But also, probably more importantly, the fact that Australia is not saying enough to defend the rights of those protesting on the streets to rule of law and democracy and all the other things that Hong Kong has had for many, many years. There's some disturbing elements to it that go back to when Julie Bishop was Foreign Minister. We'll get to those in a moment. But how do you see this playing out internationally?
Look, Peter, I think that this could be the most important story of the year, if not the decade. Look, we all know that China has very huge ambitions. The Chinese Communist Party has ambitions to essentially be the global hegemon and rewrite the world order in its own favour and with it at the top of the heap. What we're seeing here in Hong Kong is something which we haven't seen for too long, which is pushback against the totalitarian agenda of Beijing, which had, through its puppet government in Hong Kong, attempted to make it essentially so that anybody in the territory of Hong Kong could be swept up into the judicial system, the gulags, the forced labor camps, the whole non-transparent, opaque criminal justice system, to the extent we can even use the word justice when it has to deal with mainland China. We saw millions and millions of people protesting this. But the scary thing is, Peter, what we did not see was enough people in the West, either governments, including Australia's, and we saw Maurice Payne say, well, I call for restraint on both sides, when one side, of course, had rubber bullets and the other side had umbrellas. And we saw this also with Western liberals who say, oh, Donald Trump is the greatest threat to democracy, blah, blah, blah. But when there's an actual real threat to democracy, when there's a real threat to freedom in the form of a totalitarian regime in Beijing, they're silent.
Yes. Jane, it shows why you are such a good journalist, because you've picked up an Australian link to this issue that goes back a couple of years that might explain why people are so silent in this country. What can you tell us?
It does, Peter. And look, I took interest in this because there was a protest here in Perth on Sunday, and I went down to the protest, and thanks to James, that story got a run in the Daily Telegraph. We might be able to hear the frightened woman. I just want to emphasise to people, before we go to the politics of this, there are people in our midst, Australia, who are afraid to speak out. This woman spoke to me off the record very, very quietly and was afraid to give her name. Look, we do have the audio. Do you just want to have a listen to this before we go back to the politics of it, Peter?
Of course, of course.
Let's have a listen.
This is very unfair. If China thinks that you're a criminal, they can grab anyone and send them back to China. And because there is no independent courts in China, so once you send to China, it will be 99.9% you will be judged as criminal. We just want to protect everyone in Hong Kong.
So, Peter, that was a woman in Perth's Queen's Gardens on Sunday, one of 400 protesters who was too afraid to give me her name, who was saying why it was so important that this extradition treaty isn't just stamped out, not just suspended, but stopped, saying, you know, Australians could be in trouble in transition if they go to Hong Kong. But back to the push by the then Turnbull government for the ratification of this in 2017, and it's very well reported in the Australian media. You can go back and find it. There was a group of colleagues who said that Julie Bishop was very, very keen on them ratifying the Australia-China extradition treaty. Now, Labor pushed back and said, no, we're not ready to sign this extradition treaty, and so did a group of pretty tough Liberals, some Liberal backbenchers. I've spoken to a couple of them today who said they felt very, very passionately about this, about true Liberal values. They were deeply concerned that if Australia and China had an extradition treaty, if the Turnbull government signed that there would be people here in Australia who would be in danger because they simply do not trust the so-called judicial system in China. I mean, I think it is disgraceful that we came that close to signing an extradition treaty with China in 2017, Peter.
Yeah, and since you alerted me to it, I did a bit of digging around, rang a few people, and there was a brouhaha in the coalition party room about this issue. I think we've got a grab we can put up on the screen, a graphic there that's got the quote from the then Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, She says, as Foreign Minister, I will continue to work with the Labor Party and the Chinese to see if we can find a way to ratify this extradition, which I believe, and in my opinion, is undoubtedly in the national interest. Well, there's 2 million in Hong Kong who disagree with Julie Bishop, but she's no longer there, but many like her, perhaps Maurice Payne, of the same political persuasion inside the Liberal Party, the same left faction, has a similar view. That might be why we haven't heard much from Maurice Payne. I'll ask a question of her office.